So today's masterclass is on Islamic ethics, law, and bioethics. We will be looking at important concepts and constructs that bring all of this together. I will have to apologize for Sayyid Fadil Milani, who unfortunately has fallen quite ill. So if we can please remember him in our prayers. We have someone who will be stepping in for him this morning. And I think we can begin with our first session of the day, and we're running on time. So I would like to introduce our first speaker, Professor Tariq Ramadan, who is a professor of contemporary Islamic studies at Oxford University. He also teaches at the Faculty of Theology and is a visiting professor at the Faculty of Islamic Studies in Qatar, at the University of Malaysia. He's a senior research fellow in Kyoto, Japan, and director of the Research Center for Islamic Legislation and Ethics. He holds an MA in Philosophy and French Literature and a PhD in Arabic and Islamic Studies from the University of Geneva. In Cairo, he received one-to-one intensive training in classical Islamic scholarship from Al-Azhar University scholars and received several ijazah. Through his writings and lectures, he has contributed to the debate on the issues of Muslims in the West and Islamic revival in the Muslim world. He is active at the academic and grassroots levels through lecturing throughout the world on theology, ethics, social justice, ecology, and interfaith. He is president of the European think tank European Muslim Network in Brussels and a member of the International Union of Muslim Scholars. And of most relevance to us today, Professor Ramadan has been involved in bioethical discussions in the Muslim world for over a couple of decades now, and he brings with him a wealth of experience through his engagement with scholars and doctors. We call them scholars of the text and scholars of the context. So it's my pleasure to welcome him and also thank him because he's flown into the country this morning to be with us today, and he was in another country the night before and probably the night before. So we're really grateful that you can give us the time that you will today. So, Bismillah.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you for your invitation. Thank you for being here. And I think that as this is the first master's class of the Center for Islam and Medicine, and I really want to thank Arzu and all the team for the invitation. Why are you so far? Aren't you in order to see the... But there is nothing. I'm going to talk to you anyway. Okay, great. So I will be quite strict in following the questions that you have in your in the timetable, the schedule that you have here when it comes to ethics and the theory introducing the language of ethics, definition, sources, values, principles, and ethical theories, and then to go through the two parts that we have here, what is the relationship between ethics and religion. So I will follow the questions, but I want to start first with one of the main problems that we may have when it comes to ethics is the question of defining what is ethics and how do we have to deal with it. Because if you come to the Arabic language and you go straight to what we have, for example, what I did myself talking about ethics is to speak about al-akhlaq. But when you come to al-akhlaq in Arabic, it's not exactly the same as ethics in the Greek and the Western tradition. So it's very important first to understand what it means in the Western tradition first and why we are talking about ethics. On the other side, to get a better understanding of what it could mean and in which way we have to deal with it from within the Islamic tradition. So the first, which is important here, a very simple question that you have in Western philosophy is there a difference between ethics and morality? When we start by saying ethics has to do with what is good and what is bad. And it could we could add to this from what is good and what is bad to what is right and what is wrong, which is not exactly the same. Sometimes we go from the values here, the right, the good and the bad, to the normative understanding of what is right and what is wrong. But these are two different couples in a way, and we have to deal with it and to try to understand what it means in the Western tradition. So having said that, what is the difference? Is there a difference between ethics and morality? You have many theories on this coming from the Western philosophical tradition. Some are saying it's exactly the same. Morality is in Latin what is ethics in Greek. So it's just a difference of language. And then this is why we are using both. While if you look at what is happening in contemporary discussion, when it comes to applied ethics, we don't speak about morality. And from within the Western tradition, there is another theory saying, no, in fact, ethics is a way we are constructing the understanding of what is good and what is bad through one faculty, which is the common rationality of human beings. So in fact, ethics is built through the human agency or the rational human agency. It's a bottom-up construction. Morality is coming from on high. We speak about morality when we are dealing with religious reference, and we are dealing with what is coming from the sources, the Bible or the Torah, or even when we speak about Quran. This is one approach, but as you can see straight away, it's problematic because you had people from within the Western religious circles speaking about ethics from a religious viewpoint. Weber, for example, speaking about Protestant ethics, is just making it a religious thing. So there is a third theory here, which has to do with the universality and how do you deal with the universality of morality and ethics, meaning that when you speak about morality, something that is much more understood as specific to a philosophical, spiritual, and religious traditions, as opposed to ethics, which is beyond the singularity, beyond the specificity, something which is more universal. Whatever is the sources, which is, from an Islamic viewpoint, quite important, because we have to deal, and this is one of the great challenges and even one of the great questions we have within the Islamic tradition is, what are the sources of the ethical categories? So this is also a very important discussion that we have here. So having said this, it's quite important to get a sense of, it's not as simple as that when you speak about ethics. Mainly what we have now is, when we speak about ethics, is not talking about the sources. We have something which is understood as secular ethics, which is what is the product of our categorization of what is good and what is bad based on the faculty of reason, the human faculty of reason. So this is one approach, and to this you have overlapping understanding when it comes to the religious production of what is right and what is wrong could be based on the scriptural sources through the mediation or not, depending on your schools of thought of the human intellect, and you can say that this is right and this is right and that this is bad and this is good, and you have overlapping reality between the two. So the Western tradition is also problematizing the notion of ethics here as to the source, as to the categorization, and as to the consequences. So I don't want us to understand that we are dealing with something which is very simple in the Western tradition. It's complex, many theories and many philosophies on this, and contradicting philosophy. So we might find, for example, people who are rejecting anything which has to do with the religious discourse, atheists or agnostics, saying, in fact, the only way to deal and to deal with it from a universal viewpoint is to speak about ethics, because morality is something which is related to scriptural sources. So if we want to come to the common ground, we have to deal with ethics. Within the religious tradition, it's conflicting, and you will see that even in the Islamic tradition, we have this problem. How do we call it? So the notion here of ethics is to be problematized in the Western tradition. Now let us come to al-akhlaq. It's what we call al-akhlaq, and or sometimes in very specific religious and legal tradition, al-akhlaqiyat, which is sometimes also the word that we are using to speak about ethics here. So al-akhlaq, once again, it's three things. And in fact, it's not the exact translation of what is good and what is bad in theory. It's more than that, and at the same time, it's quite different. Let me just analyze this and try to give you a better picture of what we are talking about when it comes to al-akhlaq. We had from the very beginning this notion of ilm al-akhlaq, and the first understanding from the first categorization of knowledge, it had to do with the good behavior. Coming from the Quran, وَإِنَّكَ لَعَلَى خُلُقٍ عَظِيمٍ. You have a good character, meaning you have a good behavior. Through you, the Prophet, peace be upon him, we can see the translation of your values into your behavior. Why? When his wife, Aisha, radiallahu anha, was asked about him, who and how was he? The answer is, كَانَ خُلُقُهُ الْقُرْآنِ. His behavior was the embodiment, the translation of the Islamic principles, the Islamic values, in fact, khuluq. So it means about the way you are translating your values or your principles into action. So there is something which is very important here, is the first understanding of akhlaq is very practical, is not theoretical. It became theoretical to say, okay, how are you going to get a deep understanding or a right understanding of the good behavior? So the good behavior should be based on good values, right values. So how are we going to get them? So inductively it became a theoretical frame, a theoretical field, but it was not at the beginning. The very understanding of akhlaq is much more about the good behavior. And that's very important, the inductive process coming from his example. لقد كان لكم في رسول الله أسوة حسنة. He's the best model for you. So from the model, you look at the behavior, and from the behavior, you get the values and the norms. So there is an inductive. The point here, which is going to be a great space for debate and controversies, is how do you get these values? Is it through the text, or only through the text, or is there something else that you can get from somewhere else? So that's also a discussion here. So al-akhlaq has to do mainly with behavior, the practical dimension of the good behavior. So from an Islamic perspective, who is going to define the good behavior? How are you doing to get the good behavior? Of course, you can look at the Prophet's life, the seerah of the Prophet, peace be upon him. That's the best example. And he was embodied. And then you come to the text, the scriptural source, the Quran. So the question here will be from a theoretical viewpoint, how are you going to extract from the scriptural sources, the Quran and the seerah of the Prophet, or what we call the ahadith, the principles or the norms or the values that are going to get us an ethical framework? So this is one. The second thing which came straight away in our tradition, if you look at the literature, it's that the first connection with akhlaq has to do with al-adab. So meaning what we call today professional ethics. That we had very early, for example, with physician, thinking about what is the good behavior in a specific profession, for example. What we have in the Greek tradition with the Hippocrates sermon is what is the right behavior when you are a physician, and these are the principles. In the Islamic tradition, you had exactly the same understanding, and quite early, 9th century, 10th century, you have production of the codes of ethics, professional ethics. That's also something which is interesting. Straight away, it was very practical. Very practical. And in a very recent book for us, if we have to consider it in history, Muhammad Raz, in his book about ethics in the Quran, which was written in Paris, in La Sorbonne, in French, and he's Egyptian from Al-Azhar. He did his PhD in France, and this book was translated into Arabic and then came back to Egypt. He is saying that this theoretical organization of ethical norms is quite absent from the Islamic tradition. We don't have this. We didn't have that as something which was thought as a field. So this is why, and there is a first question here, is it right from an Islamic perspective? And in our center, we had this internal discussion about, should we speak about ilm al-akhlaq, which is science of ethics, or is it something else? Because if you think about ethics, that could be beyond the practical, it could be beyond science. It's by nature something which is beyond sciences and has to irradiate all the other sciences. So are we talking about the science? Are we talking about philosophy? Are we talking about a space and a meta science, in fact, that has to have an impact on all the other sciences? So here there is a problem. And even in our understanding from an Islamic perspective, our understanding of ilm, and that we translate into English by science, there could be a problem here. I'm just showing you that how problematic could be our terminology when it comes to this. So what we have here is the practical dimension it has to do. And if you look at the three dimensions that are connected to the translation of al-akhlaq or the understanding of al-akhlaq, the first is very practical, and the first science or the first field dealing with this, saying at the end of the day, everything coming from Islam has to do with the ethical behavior. You will find this in the mystical tradition. The Sufi are saying, at the end of the day, what matters is as-sulukiyat, is the way you behave. So anything that is coming from the Quran has to do with transforming your behavior. You might have whatever you want as a reference, what the Prophet, peace be upon him, said, إِنَّمَا بُعِثْتُ لِأُتَمِّمَ مَكَارِمَ الْأَخْلَاقِ. I was sent for one reason, is to beautify, to complete the good characters. This is the meaning of my mission, which is transforming. So anything which is coming with al-iman, everything which is coming with your faith has to do with transforming your behavior. So this is why الخلق العظيم الإنسان الكامل الإنسان الحكيم, everything which has to do with wisdom, with the fulfillment, has to do with the behavior. So ethics has to do with good behavior mainly. Inductively, as I said, we had in every specific profession people saying, okay, let us get in this specific profession, in this specific field, what is the good behavior? If you are a physician, if you are a philosopher, if you are whatever, what should be the good behavior? And on this, the Muslims were influenced, of course, by the Greek tradition, mainly al-falasifa, were coming with something which is an ethical framework. Aristotle wrote a complete book on theoretical ethics. And this came to Muslims through Al-Kindi, Wal-Farabi, wa Ibn Rushd, wa Ibn Sina, Ibn Rushd, up to, of course, Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, rejecting all this, but at the same time integrating it. To the point that Ibn Taymiyyah was responding to Abu Hamid al-Ghazali saying, you rejected it, but you integrated it at the same time. He's the one who said the Greek tradition should be rejected as to the reduction of everything to the Greek logic. This is coming in the 14th century. So you have the theoretical approach that we find in other traditions coming to Muslims, and it had an impact very early, and mainly about one very specific question. What are the sources of the ethical categorizations? That will be one of the points that we have. So we can see here that from the beginning, when it comes to the definition, you don't have a clear Western understanding and a not so clear Islamic on both areas, on both universes of reference. We have a complex way of defining them. So you have the normative definitions, you have the philosophical definitions, and you are going to have religious definitions. And to tell you the truth, even among religious scholars in the Shia, in the Sunni tradition, we don't agree exactly on what we are talking about. When it comes to the sources, when it comes to the frame, and when it comes to the impact or the necessity. For example, if you have a legal decision and an ethical consideration, what comes first? That's a very big question. because you can be faithful to the rule and faithful to the ethical dimension. What comes first? Do you have to respect the ethical? Do you have to respect the legal? 99% of the scholars are going to say the legal first, but what is the legal without the ethical? Big question. So we'll come to this during the day, I think, and during the year. I think you will have to deal with it in almost every issue. You will see it's critical here. So here, having said that now, what you have in the Western tradition, at least 3 theories, as I said, coming to what is the difference, what are the definitions, and how do we deal with this. In the Islamic tradition, as I said, step by step, we are going from the practical to the theoretical and to having discussions about, first, the sources, second, the categories, and third, the priorities. Okay? Sources, categories, and priorities. How do we deal with this? And this is quite important. It's very important. We have a problem today in the field as Muslim scholars, is that we are dealing with this categorization of knowledge. You know, to any Muslim university or Islamic university, you have what are Islamic sciences. You have fiqh, usul al-fiqh, ulum al-Quran, ulum al-hadith, ulum al-aqida, ulum al-tasawwuf. If you acknowledge the fact that the tasawwuf is part of the Islamic tradition, you have ilm al-kalam. If it are usul al-din, it's called like this. And then the problem is, it's as if we are dealing with these sciences as if there are there is no hierarchy, and there is one. So the problem here is when you deal with the hierarchy, understanding and getting it right, for all of you almost, the main reference as a Muslim scholar is going to be the faqih, the one who is dealing with the legal. Okay, al-faqih is the one who is dealing with fiqh, Islamic law and jurisprudence. Be careful with the way I'm translating the words. I'm not translating fiqh as Islamic jurisprudence. I think it's wrong. It's Islamic law because the frame is there, and jurisprudence. It's from there that we are constructing the whole things. Jurisprudence in itself is problematic because some are saying, oh, fiqh, it's jurisprudence and Sharia is law. That's a problem. I even think that Sharia is bigger than law. And fiqh is law and jurisprudence, and Sharia is to think law and jurisprudence within the way towards faithfulness towards Islam, which is something, once again. So I don't want you to just to get the translation without understanding the whole thing, which is now, if we speak about ethics, we need to deal with fiqh. Of course, it's part of our course here, but we need to deal also with the translation and the understanding of Sharia. And Sharia is bigger than law. It was translated as law by the jurists themselves. Every specialization is defining the concept depending on their field. So for the fuqaha, Sharia is mainly law. But when it comes to tasawwuf, for example, Sharia is deeper than that. It's how are you going to get the right behavior and to follow the right behavior to come close to Allah. This is Sharia, which is the way. Which in fact, the etymological meaning of Sharia is the way towards the source. It's a way. ثم جعلناك على شريعة من الأمر فاتبعها. We put you on شريعة من الأمر, which is a Sharia, which is al-amr, could be understood as Islam and thing. فاتبعها, follow them, follow it, follow this. So how are you going to follow a legal framework? You don't follow a legal framework, we enforce a legal framework. To follow means that it's the way for which you need the law, because the law are setting the limits, but you need the way to get the right understanding of the limits. So you can understand here that it's important to understand why Sharia is bigger or wider than that, because this is where you can merge or at least get a better understanding between ethics and law, between principles and values and norms. So you get the big picture here, which is important. So when we are dealing with this, what is important is now to enter. So we have the framework. Let me follow what we have here when it comes to the first theories that we have and in which way these were discussed. When you speak about religion, and we speak about religion as a structure universe of reference, mainly a religion, and this is why we are differentiating between philosophies and spiritualities, is the understanding that there is one God and there is transcendence. So there is this link between us and one God. From our understanding, religion is this link. Religion is religio, which is how we are linking our scriptural sources to one God and us through the revealed scriptures to Him. So there is this one reference. And with one reference, there are three things that are important. First, in order to be connected, linked to Him, they are rituals. So this is the visible dimension, rituals. And the rituals are based on the creed, which is the invisible. So once it's very important, what we have as structuring our religion is al-aqidah. Al-aqidah is the 6 pillars of faith. The 6 pillars of faith are everything which is set by our religion, coming from the scriptural source, that through the revelation, on which we have to rely to understand the deep meaning of our religion. And it's unseen and visible, and sometimes it's mysterious as to how we're going to prove it. We can't prove this. It's based on what is coming from the relation. So is al-ghaib. Al-ghaib, it's the invisible. So to get a religion, there is one God, and there is the visible side of it, which has to do with the rituals, the 5 pillars of Islam: believing in God, praying, fasting, the pilgrimage, the zakat. All this is known. So we need to have, in order to get a religion, a structure, way of practicing it. This is the first dimension, which what I'm saying here is one God and the visible relationship, the visible way of being connected to Him. And all this is based on the invisible, and the invisible is the 6 pillars of faith. So 5 pillars of Islam, 6 pillars of faith. And what we will find in the Christian tradition, in the Jewish tradition, it's exactly the same. One God, the visible dimension of the rituals, and what is the reference as to the creed, the essential creed within the creed. So these are the 3 things that are essential for us, and this has to be structured. Coming from this, what we find in what I said is one God, so the relationship to the transcendent. The visible is the rituals. And then, so the rituals are going to be based on what? By definition, the rituals are rules that you have to respect. It's norms and rules at the same time. The way you pray, these are rules, ahkam. So the visible side of a religion is always the ahkam first. And that's important to understand, philosophically speaking, because the first visible thing could be perceived as the only one. Okay? It could be perceived. What was understood by the scholars is that they cannot be the visible without relying, the visible side of the ahkam, the rules, without being connected to the ethical. In order for the rules, the ritual to get a meaning, you need to connect the rituals with the meaning, which is not always the case in the way we are teaching Islam, we are understanding the rules. And then you come to the invisible dimension, which is the creed and how you are going to connect. You believing in God, in the messengers, in the books, in the hereafter, in the day of judgment, the 6 pillars of faith that we need to get. Having this and getting an understanding of what a religion is, where are we going to find ethics in this whole structure? Where, as Muslims or as religious people, we are getting ethics on this? And these are the 3 main questions that we have in the beginning of our journey when it comes to the ethical framework. That's important. And this is where you can connect what I'm saying now to the first part about definition. The first question that we have is, so once again, ethics, what is good and what is bad? How do we define what is good and what is bad? The first attitude, the first understanding is everything that we have in the Quran saying it's an obligation is the good. Everything which is prohibited, it's the bad. So it's a very straightforward categorization. What is al-amr? It's what is good. And what is al-nahy? What is bad. So drinking alcohol, eating pork, very simple, that's bad because you can't do it. So the first categorization has to do with, in fact, the legal is going to tell us about the ethical. So it's the very simple thing that we had. And then you can go further than that. If you read the Quran, you have, for example, in Surah Taha, إنني أنا الله لا إله إلا أنا فاعبدني وأقم الصلاة لذكري. I'm God, there is no God but me, worship me and perform a prayer in order to remember me. There is a clear connection here between al-hukm wa aqim as-salah. Why? On ethical term, to have this remembrance. Remembrance, it's important. You have even a clearer verse saying, Inna as-salata tanha anil fahsha'i wal munkar. So your prayer is going to prevent you from the bad and from corruption and from perversion. So by definition, as-salat tanha, as-salah, the rule, tanha, the ethical. So you have here a clear connection, which is how do you get the ethical teaching in the religion? Any religion is providing you with an ethical understanding that you have to get and that you have to understand through the rules. So the first access is study the rules, the visible rules, you will get the invisible ethical teaching, or at least the implicit or even the explicit ethical teaching here. So what is important in our tradition to get this sense that chronologically what was first is al-fiqh, and then from the fiqh you try to get through the fiqh the ethical. That's a very critical question here. Because the second question that you have is what is or what are the sources of ethical? Are you going to read the scriptural sources and then through the scriptural sources and the rules that you have, you inductively get the ethical through the text? Which means that, in fact, it's not only the text, it's the text and within the text, the legal that is informing you about the ethical. So you put first and then it's a priority. Or is there another way to get the ethical? The scholars and mainly the philosophers, in our tradition, you have three types of philosophers. Not two, not one, it's three types. In fact, you have one, which is it's coming straight away from the Greek tradition. We call them al-falasifa. Falasifa is the Arabic transliteration of philosophy, falasifa. And these are the philosophers that I was mentioning before, coming from and influenced by the Greek tradition, Al-Kindi, Al-Farabi, Ibn Sina, Ibn Rushd, etc. In fact, they took from and in fact they were mainly influenced by the Aristotelian tradition, based on a specific Greek logic that was not the only Greek way of thinking, by the way. If you come back to the Greek, you can find that there are many other ways. Even the principle of non-contradiction that was found with Aristotle was disputed in the Greek tradition, which is a problem. Because we were influenced by the Aristotelian, but it might be that we are closer to other tradition in the Greek tradition. And this was the intuition that Ibn Taymiyyah had by saying it's a problem. If we are colonized by the Greek logic, it might be that we are not dealing with the Islamic logic per se. But this is another discussion. Let me come to the categorization. The Falasifa were, in fact, thinking that you don't even need the text. You don't even need the Quran. Your rationality, it's enough to get the principle of knowledge. In fact, Socrates or Plato or Aristotle, thinking that by using your reason in the right way, you will get the right understanding of the Islamic value, or the universal value that are, in fact, by definition, not in contradiction with the Greek tradition. This is what we find, it's one. And the most important tradition that we have in Islam is based on two other trends that are coming from al-mutakallimun, min ilm al-kalam. We tend to translate mutakallimun or ilm al-kalam as theology in Islam from Arabic to English, and I think it's wrong. What we have is theology and philosophy at the same time. And be careful, because theology, it's an informed discourse about God, theos, logos. Philosophy is how do you construct a system of value and principles and norm coming from a source that you are acknowledging or that you are relying on. And here, this is something which is important. The way you define things is, are we dealing here with theology, so we are going to talk with theologians, or are we talking with both theology and philosophy? And I would say that if you look at the way they are constructing their thought and dealing with the issue, has to do with philosophy and not only with theology. Having said that, what we have in al-mutakallimun, it's the two way that you know. It's one way, which is this time, as philosophers and theologians, not to go through ethics through the rules inductively. This is the first, okay? From al-ahkam ila al-akhlaq, is to look from the scriptural sources to al-akhlaq, which is questioning the sources. What are the sources? Mainly not the upstream sources, and here it's a bottom up, and here it's a top down. We have the sources, where how are we going to get ethics? And you have two main, in fact you have three main answers to this, but it's very important to get the two way they were dealing with philosophy. In fact, when it comes to the sources and starting from the sources, the big question is, do you get a sense of what is good through the texts only, or do you have, or can you rely on another faculty? And the big question is that we find everywhere in the Islamic tradition the relationship between al-naql wal-aql, the scriptural sources and rationality. So the Mu'tazila that we know in our tradition are saying, in fact, God sent the text to us, to our rationality. And as he is al-ahad, which is al-tawheed, and he is just, al-adl, al-Mu'tazila were known in our history as Ahl al-Tawheed wal-Adl. Saying he is just, he gave us the faculty to produce, to get first and to produce ethical norms, ethical understanding. Meaning, if I'm telling you that this is bad, am I saying that this is bad because it's in the text, or can I find it out of my own rational autonomy? How is it bad? Is it bad per se, or is it bad because God says it's bad, or is it bad because I see it as bad? So the moral categorization or the moral categories are in my mind, in itself, or are only coming from God. So they are saying it's coming from God, but what God is doing is just confirming something which is in the object and in my mind. So there is a space for human autonomy. The Mu'tazila are saying it's between me and the object, and God is just confirming what is already there. If not, he would be unjust, because how is it going to judge me if there is nothing in my mind and nothing in the object? The Ash'ari are responding to this, no, that's arrogance. In fact, it's bad or good only because he's saying it's bad or good. Nothing, we are just, our rationality should get it right, it's coming from the text. Okay? The text is informing us about what is good and what is bad. So you got the first theory here coming from al-ahkam ila al-akhlaq wal-nusus ila al-akhlaq. A second theory here, which is more philosophical. okay, philosophical, and theology at the same time. So in this, what we got coming from the Islamic tradition is how do we define what is good and what is bad, and what are the sources? You can get the impact of such theories in our daily life. Al-Maturidiyya are coming, people who came afterwards saying it's in between, saying there are things that you need to rely on the text to get the right understanding. So there are things coming from the text, and there are things that you can get from your rationality, saying it's not mutually exclusive. Both can work. In fact, the great majority of the scholars, even though they had in history to say, I'm Ash'ari, like for example, Abu Hamid al-Ghazali saying, I'm Ash'ari. In fact, if you go further, you understand that he's in between. He's taking from this and from that. Because the Ash'ari, if you push it to the final logic, it's you can't say anything rationally speaking. You have to rely on the text. The great majority are saying, no, rationally I can get it. In fact, there is a complementarity between the text and my rationality, which in fact, it's a very critical discussion here because it questions the human agency in the whole construction of the ethical categories, where rationality could be. And there is the third way of dealing with it, which is coming, and we should not underestimate this. Is your heart saying something about what is good and what is bad? So the Sufi tradition are saying yes. In fact, it's coming from God, it's coming from my mind, but it's also coming from my heart, and it's coming from something which could be perceived as universal good behavior. To the point that if you come to the text in Arabic, when you have to deal in legal terms or in ethical terms to what is good, what is the Arabic concept that you have in the Quran? You don't have haram and halal or haram in the text. You have something which is, what do you have to do on earth as a Muslim? You have to تؤمر بالمعروف وتنهى عن المنكر. So you have to promote what is known as being good and what is known as being bad. Ma'ruf has the source and a meaning. Ma'ruf, it's min al-urf, known by the people as being good. Ma'ruf, known as being good. Munkar, known as being bad. So there is something which is not only coming from the text. God is talking to us, to our heart and our personal feeling that, in fact, if you rely on people, they know in a way that this is bad, and they know that this is good. So there is something which is, or could be understood, that in the way we have been created, there is a parameter, there is something in us that could help us say, that's not good. We can feel it, which is not only rational. It could be cultural, and it could be spiritual. Al-fitra. Fitrat Allah allati fatara an-nasa alayha is the fitra by and through which we have been created. Is there something in us telling us that's not good? So the text, An-Nur, which is one of the names of the text, Al-Quran, An-Nur, is coming to our Nur, which is in us, and in fact informing us or reminding us, إِنَّا نَحْنُ نَزَّلْنَا الذِّكْرِ. A dhikr is remembrance of something that is in us that could get a sense that this is bad or this is good. Which in this way is something which is very close to many mystical traditions, saying, rely on you. Which is what? Istafti qalbak. Ask your heart. Your heart knows. So that's very interesting because in some, if you go to Al-Muhasibi, in the way he is dealing with Istafti qalbak is your heart knows. And if you read some of the ulama, fuqaha, they are saying, yes, your heart knows as long as you get enough knowledge of the ahkam. So meaning you need the ahkam to open your heart. I'm saying, no, your heart could be open and it could help you to get the ahkam. This discussion is essential. It's essential. Do you rely on the ahkam to get the ethical, or is there something in your heart which is opening up naturally by your very nature to something which is the right or the wrong, the good or the bad? So you can see here that this is a critical discussion. And you have these theories in the Islamic tradition. It's deep, to the point that you can get that some of the fuqaha are saying the Ahl al-Tasawwuf are not even Muslims. They are very dangerous because they are taking from other theories and they are bringing them. While it's difficult to say that Hassan al-Basri and al-Muhasibi and al-Junayd were outside the Islamic reference. It's difficult to say that. In fact, it's impossible between you and me. They are part of our tradition and they are very strict. These are mutasawwifin, very strict with the rules. But they have a very specific understanding of human nature. And saying at the end, yes, Islam is a practical way to implement ethics because it has to do with behavior. But through the behavior, you can and you have to discuss what are the sources that are informing you about the good behavior. And your heart is one of your of the sources, not only your mind and not only the texts, which has to do with the way you deal with people who are rejecting God, so meaning rejecting the religious structure. لَهُمْ قُلُوبٌ لَا يَفْقَهُونَ بِهَا. They have hearts and they don't understand. And by the way, I'm just coming from Morocco when I had a discussion on medical ethics about transplant and organ transplant and about the heart and the new discoveries that we had over the last 2 years about the fact that there could be neurons in the heart. That the fact that if you give and you transplant a heart, there is behavior and feelings that are coming with it. So it might be, look at that, it might be that what the scholars were saying, the heart is not the physical heart. It might be that now, al-qalb in the Quran could be in fact the al-qalb, coming to the hadith saying al-mudgha, which is the flesh. So we might have been very philosophical and now our contemporary discoveries are bringing to the physical. No, al-qalb huwa al-qalb. That in the qalb there were things that you didn't even thought they were there because you think that the neurons and neurology and everything which has to do with the synapse and everything which has to do with understanding is there. No. And by the way, if I'm not mistaken, what we find now is that the neurons are in the mind, in the heart, and in the stomach. Wow. And you know that some are saying now that your second brain is your stomach. Okay, get that right. So it means that the more we go, the more we get this understanding. But here I wanted to have the three theories that we have coming and discussing ethics from an Islamic viewpoint. And you can see here that the problematics that we have in the Western tradition, in the Islamic tradition, now you enter into the Islamic tradition and you can see that one of the main problems that we had is the sources. What are the sources of ethics in this? I have to stop at 30, is it right? Before 15? Okay, that's fine. So yes, at 15. Okay. So I started late and I have to stop before. That's fine. I'm joking. I'm okay. No, that's fine. Really, I was joking, really. Sometimes I joke. Halal joke. Anyway, so this is something here which has to do with our understanding. And so if you have to deal with the questions that you have here in your do ethics depend on religion? You have different answers coming from the different tradition. The Mu'tazila, all of them, by the way, that's very important. All of them would say it's connected by definition. In Islamic ethics, all of them are saying that it's within the universe of reference. The differences are how much do we have to rely on the scriptural sources and how are the exact sources, or could rationality and the heart. So in fact, for some they're saying we can't speak about Islamic ethics or ethics outside religion. Why? Because the main sources are Al-Quran wa Al-Ahadith. Okay, the Quran. So this is the Al-Ash'ariyya, for example, in the Sunni tradition are saying, no, it has to be within religion. The Mu'tazila and Al-Maturidiyya are saying, yes, it has to rely on the scriptural sources, but you will find people having no relationship with any religion being able to produce ethical values. Out of what? Of the rationality. So you have one important philosophers, one of the important philosophers, you heard about Ibn Tufayl. Ibn Tufayl wrote a book called Hay Ibn al-Yaqazan, how do you translate this in English? Sorry? Okay, so that's it. Maybe I have to repeat it for the people. No? So what? Say it again. Living. Okay, living some of awakening. The awaken. Okay, no, but that's fine. No, but that's fine. So this book, it's important. Why? Because this is the story which was taken by Robinson Crusoe and the whole tradition, which is in fact the first philosophical novel that we had in the Islamic tradition, and this was much before what we had in the West, which is for somebody arriving in an island, being on his own. Is he going to produce an ethical or a legal framework? And the point is, yes. So your rationality is able to produce ethical norms or to get some ethical norms, and from the ethical norms to produce the legal framework. And as I said, in the Sufi tradition, they have exactly the same understanding. It could be rational, but it could be from the very nature of human being. And get me right, on an Islamic, from a philosophical and Islamic perspective, what I'm saying here is how much can you rely on human beings? It means that it gives you a specific understanding. Do you have to be cautious? Do you have to deal with what is produced by human beings as something which you are doubting, or can you rely on, and at the end is your understanding of the very nature of human being is naturally good or naturally bad, which was a big discussion in the West. Are we naturally good or are we naturally bad? When you read in the Quran, Surah Yusuf, Inna an-nafsa la ammaratun bis-su'. So by definition, your nafs is pushing you towards the bad. But at the same time, so that you have in Surah Al-Hujurat, وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ حَبَّبَ إِلَيْكُمُ الْإِيمَانِ He made you love Iman, وَزَيَّنَهُ فِي قُلُوبِكُمْ He beautified it in your heart, meaning that there is something that is naturally attracting you towards the good, to the point that the scholars were very cautious with this discussion. You have different theories on are we naturally good, are we naturally bad. Through these theories, you can get a sense of different understanding or different way of trusting or not human nature. So do we have to deal with human nature? The last chapter of the Quran is قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ النَّاسِ مَلِكِ النَّاسِ بِإِلَٰهِ النَّاسِ. So meaning be cautious with human beings. But you also have وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. We gave dignity to human beings. So this picture here, it's quite problematic. And you have also in the Quran وَنَفْسٍ وَمَا سَوَّاهَا فَأَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا. The way we have been created, we have been inspired towards what is corrupting us, the corrupt side, and the purification process. So the one who is going to reform it is going to be saved, and the one who is going to corrupt it is going to be. So we have both in a way. But through these theories, you can get a sense of different ways. So out of all this discussion, when it comes to the discussion of ethics, you have implicitly first and then explicitly a conception of God. Important. Is God giving us everything through the text, or is it Is he giving us many things through our own creation? This is one. You have a conception of human being. Are we good? Are we bad? Is there a space for our autonomy, rational and spiritual autonomy? Spiritual meaning the heart, intellectual autonomy, or do we have to rely on the revealed text? So this is a concept of human being. And there is a third thing which is important, which is coming here from a bigger philosophical discussion, which is where I stand. I would like us to start with the last point that I'm making, is that the concept of the creation. Why? Because the words in Islam are not here by accident. Allahu al-Khaliq, He's the creator. He created al-Khalq, which is the creation. And He asked the human beings to behave with akhlaq, which is good behavior. The three words are coming from the same root. Khalaqa, al-Khaliq, khalaqa al-Khalq, wa talaba min al-insan al-akhlaq. He's expecting us to deal with al-akhlaq. In fact, the way we are going to integrate within the creation as human being is to behave with al-akhlaq, to be part of al-khalq, and to respond to al-khaliq. So these words are very important here. And we have them in many, many, many ways. Even in the way we are dealing with reading the Quran and reading the world, it's exactly the same. In fact, even when I'm talking about the verse, it's strong, it should be science, and we have the text is full of science and the creation is full of science, and both are mirroring one another. So we have ayat في الآفاق وفي أنفسهم آيات القرآن وآيات الخلق. It's all coming together. So there is a terminology that we are underestimating in our tradition in the way we are dealing with the terminology. So now, if we come to this, there is one last point that I wanted to make, and then I will finish, and trying to respect the time that we have. There is one question that you have in the second part, and I just want to say something about this, which is the difference between al-ahkam wal-akhlaq, between the legal and the ethical. So there is a difference between principles and norms, between values and law. So what we have in as a first Islamic sciences was, the first Islamic science was al-fiqh. Al-fiqh is dealing with Islamic law and jurisprudence, is when you have al-hukm saying you have to do this and you can't do this, this is licit and this is not, etc. So we have to deal with the rules. So when we deal with the rules, we deal with the limits of what we can do and what we can't do. So this is the legal. And in our societies, we have a legal framework. We know that this is legal and this is not legal. And from an Islamic perspective, we have exactly the same. You can say, is it licit or is it not? And we have 5 categories in Islam. Mainly we have this in both the tradition, the Sunni and the Shia. In the Sunni tradition, it's based on al-ahkam al-taklifiyya, which is al-haram, and then al-haram, al-makruh, al-mubah, al-mustahab, wa al-halal. So meaning what is permissible, what is detestable, what is recommended, and what is haram. So you have, and what is preferable. And you have the 5 categories, and the great majority of things that we have are permissible per se. Al-aslu fil ashya al-ibaha is that permission comes first, and then you have categories, al-ahkam al-taklifiyya, depending on the context, something that could be halal, could be haram, and something that could be preferable, could be detestable. So we have a category, and this is where it's all based on what? On al-ahkam, so the legal framework. But in fact, what the fuqaha are presenting as the legal is at the same time, as you can see here, ethical. In fact, al-ahkam al-taklifiyya are ethical legal. It's, when you say it's preferable, it's something which is not the legal, it's something which is an understanding of what already is ethical, depending on what is preferable to do this, or is detestable, or it's permissible. So you can see here that in the categorization that we find in the legal framework, we already have something which is ethical. And the ethical is going to be the meaning of things. So the ethical is good and bad, based and should be based on three elements. The first, as I said, is the source. From where does it come and how are we going? The second is the means, and the third is the goals. So this is why there is no ethical discussion if you don't connect the ahkam, the rules, with the goals. In fact, the understanding of the means and the goals will help you to extract the ethical. Okay? وَأَقِمِ الصَّلَاةَ لِذِكْرِ. It means that the meaning of why you pray is remembrance. The meaning of what you pray, إِنَّ الصَّلَاةَ تَنْهَى عَنِ الْفَحْشَاءِ. The goal of praying is تَنْهَى عَنِ الْفَحْشَاءِ وَالْمُنْكَرِ. The goal is to prevent you from what is bad. So the ethical is going to be the connection between the means and the goal. So that's very important. And the ethical, it's not only the means and the goals, it's the means and the source. Okay, between the two. And what we call in Arabic, in the legal, al-'alla. Al-'alla is the raison d'être, is why do you have to do what you have to do, which is the reason and then the goal at the same time. Between the two, this dynamic here, this dialectical process, you can extract the ethical. So, for example, you know that you have, legally, you have, if you respect the rules, you have to fast. This is legal. You know exactly what you have to do. And then you have to say, what do you have to fast? What is the relationship within the legal here? You have to fast and the objective. And the objective is what? Is to ponder, to come close to God, to remember the poor people. So the ethical is coming from these two. You ask the meaning of the legal to get the substance of the ethical. The problem is that if you don't do this, you can end up being obsessed with the legal and forgetting the ethical. And this is formalism, when you respect the legal, the limits, but you don't understand what you do, or you don't want to get the very meaning. And I'm always taking this example of people fasting Ramadan, respecting the legal, and don't getting at all the ethical, which is eat less. But in fact, they don't eat during the day, and they eat more during the night, which is the opposite. So it's legally they are right. No one, no faqih can say this is not fasting. Yes, it's fasting. In the formalistic way, they are fasting. In the ethical way, there is something missing. Why? Because the legal is not connected to the objectives. So in fact, it's important in everything that we are doing to get the relationship between sources, means, and objective. Sources is, where does it come from? Al-Quran al-Karim. And the Quran al-Karim is sometimes telling you about the objective. The legal, it's means, but you should be very cautious not to make the means the ends, or respecting the means the ends. It's not only this. We have to connect the means with the goals. And the goals are al-maqasid, in the big picture, or al-'ilal, or al-hikmah, which is the wisdom behind the rule. Why do we have to do this? Why do we need to? So from a legal perspective, you can get this understanding. So as I said, it's very important here to understand that the ethical is coming from the Quran. The ethical is coming from the way you deal with the ahkam, with al-'illa, with the raison d'être, or the hikmah, the wisdom behind the rule, but also with the big picture. What do you have to achieve? What do you need to achieve? Which you can get. It's an overall and a comprehensive, holistic understanding, and very technical at the same time. It's very technical when it comes to the rules, and it's very philosophical when it comes to the big picture. So ethics, it's coming from these two dimensions here, and you need the legal to get the ethical, but if you have the legal without ethical, you can get the limits without understanding the meaning. Okay? So that's it. I'm always in between what you were expecting me to do and the time. That's fine. Thank you.
For laying out the framework upon which
Sorry?
The break was at 11:30.
This is what I got here.
Okay, so I think we have a few minutes now, maybe 5 minutes for a couple of quick
Okay.
questions.
No, the break. Oh, yeah, okay.
I got confused. Apologies. So we have time for a few quick questions. 5 minutes, literally, because otherwise we'll be eating into the break. So, yeah, who do we have? Okay, we'll start with Dr. Asim. Yeah, do you want to pass this up?
So, thank you so much. Do you want me to use the mic? Just for the... Assalamu alaikum. My name is Dr. Asim Yusuf, and I'm a doctor. That's the introduction. I wanted to ask a question. I mean, I have many questions, but just focusing on that the last point that you made. The relationship, the idea that ethics is found in the relationship between sources, means, and outcomes or goals. And then you mentioned specifically. I was hoping you would talk about it, but I wanted to ask specifically about illah and hikmah. The fuqaha tend to be very particular about basing rulings on ilal, but not on hikam. And it seems to me that this is something that really needs to be explored, especially the relationship, in terms of fiqh, the relationship between, and especially what we're talking about here with bioethics, the relationship between hikmah and ethics, and the relationship between the maqasid and ethics, and how specifically they relate to the derivation of fiqh. I was wondering if you could maybe elaborate a little bit on that.
Yes, that's a good point. I mentioned it about the ilal, the raison d'être. There are two things that we need to remember. For some scholars, al-illah hiya al-hikmah. So it means that in fact the raison d'être is the wisdom behind. For others, there are something which is bigger than that. It's wider than that. It's the ethical, in fact, what we can get as the meaning of this. For the fuqaha, in fact, to reduce the ethical to this, it's to be sure that we have a dawabit, which is the regulation. It's clear. So, in fact, they are less interested, for the great majority of them, on the ethical side of the explanation than to justify the legal. And this could lead towards formalism in the way this is what we have. Now, what is important by connecting this process of getting the raison d'être through this understanding of al-hukm in the light of al-maqsad, this is what is helping us to reconcile the primacy of the ethical over the legal. Not to underestimate the legal, but to give it a very specific meaning within a bigger understanding, which is exactly the discussion that we have now. When we bring, for example, some of the scholars of the text with some of who are specialized, you can see that that's exactly the point. Do you need a fatwa, which is a legal limitation, which is telling you this is possible or not, or are you opening up towards the ethical discussion, dealing with al-illa, yes, al-dawabit, we want to respect them, but at the same time the big picture of what is the higher objective that we need to get. So are we just trying to justify a limitation and to understand a way that is helping us to get the right thing, which is exactly the deep discussion that we have now. So within the legal tradition, this discussion about al-illa wal-hikmah was not always the way you were putting it. Yes, it was, for some, al-hikmah is wider than al-illa. For some, the illah, it's what we call al-hikmah, which we can see that could be a problem. It's exactly the same with the tafasir al-Quran. كما أرسلنا فيكم رسولا منكم يتلو عليكم آياتنا ويزكيكم ويعلمكم الكتاب والحكمة. Hikmah here was understood as what? Not a wisdom. It was a sunnah. So sunnah hadith. So hadith the legal. So you can see the reduction. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, I think we only had time for one question. It is the break time now, and we've got to stick to the timetable. So we will have an opportunity for more questions after the next session before lunch for about half an hour. So please find your way to the foyer. Is it that way? Yeah. That way. Follow Obada. He will show you where the tea and coffee will be served, and be back here by 11:45. Yes, in 15 minutes. Okay, we'll see you then for the next session.